exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Tie me kangaroos down. Oi, tie me kangaroos down. Aborigines, kangaroos. You know we're in the Outback now.
I'm sorry, I can hardly hear you, Tim. What are you doing in that kangaroo's pouch anyway?
It's a form of transportation around these parts.
No,
beside my friend here knows the way to Pine Gap. We want to get out there as quickly as possible and find out if the aliens are really there at this remote outpost.
Oh, well, I guess it's kind of like our Area 51 here in the United States. I guess reverse technology, maybe even an alien or two.
Yep, but we've got to be careful. You see those warning signs that say keep out? We don't want to end up in some Aussie jail, but we better get going. It's kind of sticky and smelling inside this pouch.
Okay, I say that we abort this project, get back to the studio, and let our special guest from Australia fill in the gaps tonight.
Gaps is in Pine Gap?
Let's
get going then. It's quite a hop, skip, and a jump back to the KCO studios in Vegas.
All right, giddy up, boy, giddy up.
Giddy up. All right. Boy, this kangaroo gotta go, man. I tell you couldn't have one of them as a pet, Tim. They just kick too damn much.
Yeah, but I've heard though that they're pretty tasty.
Oh boy, I don't know. Hey, they'll be selling them at Popeyes next week. If you can't get a chicken sandwich, you can get a kangaroo one. I don't know. Nah, not for me. I'm too humane for that. But hey, I guess people can assume by this point that we're going to be talking to somebody in Australia. And boy, am I looking forward to this conversation because I like to talk to strangers in far off lands. I always had pen pals when I was growing up. Of course, most of them were in the UFO field. We exchanged magazines and all. And, well, you and I both, I think we were frequent contributors to the last printed magazine in English, which was called the Ufologist, which came out of Australia. And we have the head of a UFO group from Australia tonight. A group that's probably been in existence longer than any other organization that we know of. So take it away in Jasper and tell us what we're going to be speaking about tonight.
Well, sure. Well, tonight I'm really happy that we have with us Cheryl Gotcha. And now Cheryl was born in Brisbane, Australia, but at an early age lived on a cattle station in country Queensland, where as a child she often looked at the stars, like all of us, I think, and wondered if there was other life in the universe. Now, in her teenage years, she developed an interest in the paranormal, and in 1988, she became an active UFO investigator for the Brisbane-based organization UFO Research Queensland, and has since held 2 terms as president for a total of 24 years. Now, soon after joining UFORQ, Cheryl had her own close encounter with the commonly described gray aliens appearing to her in her home. And this followed by the development of a serious 10-year illness, during which time she experienced a near-death experience, out-of-body experiences, and other mystical, paranormal, and psychic phenomena. Her quest for what was happening to her led her on the path to shamanism and the understanding that these events were an invitation, but more importantly, an initiation into other realms, populated by a variety of beings. Her personal experiences catapulted her into the world of shamanism, and she now uses and teaches shamanic practices. Now, in 1992, Sheryl also established the first close encounter support group in Brisbane after Bud Hopkins spoke for the first time at a conference there. So now Sheryl is a regular writer for the Australian bi-monthly publication UFO Encounter and the UFO Truth magazine published in the UK. And she also co-hosts her own weekly show called Strange Encounters and co-hosts Strange Encounters Down Under Zoomcast with author and contactee Susie Hansen. So, Sheryl, thank you very much for being with us tonight on Exploring the Bizarre.
Oh, hi, guys, and it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh man, you kidding? This is great stuff here. I guess your investigation has gone way beyond lights in the sky. But before we get into your background and some of your experiences, do you know anything about Pine Gap?
I don't know a lot, except that there have been reports of strange craft disappearing into the land there. And there was, there was actually one such report in Timothy Good's book, Alien Liaison, I think, and where a witness actually saw a craft flying into a mountain. Obviously, it didn't crash, and it just disappeared, swallowed it up. But that's not the first time. It's not the only time, too. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we mentioned that in our book, just came out, that we've been promoting the Area 51 warning, keep out, because we have. I was going to say, well, I was going to call it a big event, but we don't know what size event it will be this weekend, because the people who are organizers of the storm Area 51. Some of them have pulled out as far as Vegas, and I don't know, but we'll see if it gets any attention on the media. There was quite a build-up to it, but now in the last couple of days, we've been seeing over and over and over again the Tic Tacs. The objects that are flying there at the over the ocean. That was on CNN this morning, but it's been on every other program too. So. That's not. There doesn't really seem to be anything new about it. So, do you think there are aliens out there at Pine Gap?
Oh, I don't know about that. There could be, but I'm just not sure about that. Just going from witnesses' accounts, there's obviously something strange going on there. That's for sure, which have to do with some sort of craft that are doing things that aren't. Don't fit into our known physics.
Reverse technology, perhaps?
Could be. Anything's possible, that's for sure.
Well, indeed. Well, give us a little a breakdown on the organization. Is it the oldest UFO organization in the world? What year was it founded?
It's 1956, but I believe that the Cleveland, Ohio UFO group, I think they beat us by a few months.
Yes. You're very well informed, because I was just talking to Peter Robbins today, who was, of course, Bud Hopkins, associate for many, many years. And I mentioned that you were going to be on the show and that you represented this group. And that's what he said, too, that cups might have been around a little bit longer. Well, if they're the cups, you're the saucers. That's all I know.
What I do know is there's not many of the older groups still left. Still functioning,
No, indeed. Are there any members still around from the glory days?
There is a gentleman who's part of our team. He was a past president. His name's Colin Phillips, and he was involved with the George Adamski World Tour way back in the day. And he's 80 now. And but I think he's probably the last one who's still alive who was involved then. Yeah, interesting times. Our organisations, because of that, we've sort of inherited the legacy of the contactees. That's how I got involved. I was very interested in that.
you may be the last. You're kind of the giant rock of Australia, or the Outback.
Yep, I think so. I think that's true.
That would, we'll march on Pine Gap together. But because I don't think there's anybody left. Bob Short, who was one of the original contactees and channels from the George Van Tassel Giant Rock era, he died about I don't know, recently, within the last few months, and I don't know anybody else that's left there. Maybe a cousin of Van Tassel and a nephew, but it's certainly whittled down. What are the objectives of the group?
Well, the main one is to discover the meaning of the UFO phenomenon. You can have a lot of facts, you can collect a lot of data, but then you've got to try and understand what the heck does it mean. And that's not easy.
Well, because UFOs are a lot of different things. So if somebody sees an object over here, it may be totally different than the experience that somebody else is undergoing somewhere else. So it's kind of like a jigger of a cocktail. You don't know exactly what you're going to get until you mix it up. Well, that's not a good analogy. That's a pretty poor analogy, but I guess I just want to drink.
I think inherent in that objective is, you can collect a lot of stories from a lot of witnesses who've had close encounters, which is my main interest. But you've still got to try and understand what that means outside of the individual's perceptual framework or their filtering system, because by the time a witness comes forward to us, they've talked about it with other people. Yeah. Sometimes they've had negative experiences, negative feedback from family and friends. It's not as common for them to have positive feedback. And so they're trying to make sense of it themselves. So sometimes by the time they get to us, their perception and interpretation is really coloured by those external, events.
Now, your own experiences, they started after you became involved in the group?
Yes, strangely enough. And I don't know what that means. There's another thing. Make sense of that. Maybe it's a strange synchronicity. I don't know.
Synchronicities play a darn big a part in all of this. I know I've written a book recently about my synchronicities, and then we're not just talking about like you're thinking of somebody and they call on the phone the next day. I mean, enough material to fill a 450-page book. Some really remarkable stuff. But okay, so you're involved in this group. You're the head of it, and all of a sudden you're dragged screaming into a living nightmare. Boy, that's dramatic. Go ahead. So tell us about it.
I didn't have that experience, but I know some people who've come forward and they did.
Yes.
But my experience, I joined the group in 1988, and 1990 I had a close encounter. And what happened was that I'd gone to bed and I woke up in the early hours of the morning, but it was still, very dark. But I saw standing beside the bed next to me these three small beings, the typical sort of grey creatures that people describe, and they were being silhouetted by the street light outside. So there was only about, a metre between the bed and the window, and they're fitting in there. And what's one of the strange things that comes up is these three appearing all the time. I don't know what that means either, but it's very common in reports with people who have these experiences that they will see three of these beings. And then I was terrified. I was petrified. I described it as like waking up and seeing a Bengal tiger just sitting there looking at you very close, and like, what the hell do you do? And that was the sense of sheer terror that I felt. And the next thing what happened was I automatically started saying the Lord's Prayer, which is really strange because I'm not a religious person, but I did go to Sunday school as a kid. The first thing was I was surprised I even still knew it. And secondly, I just pulled the sheet up over my head. And the next thing I know, it's morning. So the question then is, well, how does a person who's terrified go to sleep? Anyway, I woke up the next morning, didn't have every memory of it, and went through my normal morning routine. And just after lunchtime, I remember something happened. I don't know what, but the memory of it was triggered, and it just came flooding back to me then. It wasn't an experience where I remember being taken on board a craft or anything like that. I don't remember having any, didn't have any body marks or anything like that, but it was just a very strange experience, and I don't know how to explain that.
Can you describe the beings in a little bit more detail?
Well, it was difficult because they were silhouetted, so their faces were in shadow, yet I strangely have this memory of their large black wraparound eyes, and I don't know how that is, but the heads were the typical inverted pear-shaped heads. They were quite emaciated. They were short. They wouldn't have been more than 3.5 feet tall. And the interesting thing is, I'm 5'7", so, and I'm not I'm not a petite person. I'm not overweight or anything, but I'm not petite, and I'm quite strong. And in times gone past, when my husband was travelling, I'd hear a sound in the house. I'd get up and get the kitchen knife out and walk through the house looking for burglars or something. But in this particular experience, I didn't do that, where I could have easily gotten up and just knocked these guys over, but I didn't because they were so alien to me. And people often say, yeah, let's get the alien, let's get the craft down here. We want to talk to them. Yeah. But actually, when you have that experience, the response, because they are so alien, is, you can't predict it. And I think maybe perhaps that's part of the cover-up, is because we don't know, or the authorities don't know how people would actually respond if that information came out fully. You know what I mean?
Well, now, did they have a message? Did you communicate with them at all?
Nothing.
No message.
Not at all. Nothing. No.
Not even a handshake.
Not even an invitation for a cup of tea.
And have you had reoccurring encounters with the same beings or different beings?
Not in that way, but I've seen UFOs, and I mean UFOs, not misinterpreted lights in the sky. I've had about 6 good sightings. One in particular was in 1992 when we went on a sky watch, and it was about 3 a.m, and there were these 3 orange football-shaped objects that came down. They probably would have been about 1 to 1.5 meters long, and they came down over the dam where we were camping. And as I ran down to the water, they were so low that you could see the reflection of them on the water. They didn't make any sound. One just went out, one slowly left, and another one faded off into the distance, and the other one came down on the other side of the inlet and came down to ground. And some of the guys who were there with the sky watching, they drove around there to see if they could find anything on the ground, any effects of, burnt trees. Nothing. Went back the next day, found nothing. So I don't know what that was either.
How many active members do you have in the group?
At the moment, we probably membership. We have, I think it was 70 something last time we looked. We've got 5 team members who do the work and organise everything. But in times gone past, particularly in the 90s, when everything just skyrocketed off the map.
Yeah.
I mean, we had like over about 350, 380 members then. It was just amazing time that decade.
How about back in the early days of Adamski and all? What size meetings did you have? How many people showed up for?
Well, I wasn't involved then, but I can tell you when George Adamski came to Brisbane, they organised a meeting for him in the town hall, and it's a very big city hall, and they had 2,000 people in there, and they had strung up speakers outside, so that people outside who couldn't get in could hear what he was saying. But he had a really, difficult response from the audience. There were university students running around, and they had paper plates held up in front of them. They were painted green, and I think that from memory there was people at one stage. People were throwing things at him, and he walked off the stage once. And I know that because my late father-in-law had been a member a long time ago, and he'd gone to that event.
It sounds like a political convention.
Yes, well, it was well organised to debunk him, that's for sure. Whoever organised it, whoever was there, who knows?
Well, there's a lot to be said pro and somewhat to be said con about Mr. Adamski. I mean, I think with a lot of these contactees, they get attention and they want a little bit more, so they add a little bit to their story just to keep people coming back to hear what they have to say. I mean, because we know he was involved. Mr. Adamski was involved with I guess metaphysical or occult philosophy going back to 1935. Most people don't realize this, but he actually had set up some sort of commune in California with a pyramid and was trying to get people to join this group. Then he started the Mystical Order of Tibet, and then he wrote a book called Pioneers from Space, which we have reprinted here in the States. And then later on, he wrote about his encounter with the face of being Orthon in the desert. But be that as it may, now, do you guys have contactees over there like Adamski? I mean, do you have your own a breed of?
There are people. We don't really, not today. Although there are people. Actually, that's not quite true. There's a gentleman in Sydney called Damien John Knott. I don't know if you've heard about him over in the States, but he seems to be like a UFO magnet. Everywhere he goes, UFOs turn up, and he films a lot of UFOs.
Well, we call them UFO Repeaters. We have a book called UFO Repeaters. The camera doesn't lie. These people seem to have the uncanny ability of going out daytime or nighttime, pointing the camera at the sky, clicking away, and getting some very unusual objects, and sometimes even the outlines or figures of individuals.
That's right. Yeah. Why is that? Who knows? But, statistics don't sort of match what's going on. You can have, statistics show that an individual will have multiple experiences, whether they're close encounters or UFO sightings in their life, whereas statistically that doesn't seem to make sense, because you think if 1 in 30 people had those experiences, then 2 in 60 and so on. But it doesn't come out like that. It comes out that one individual repeatedly has these experiences, and try and make some sort of sense of that, particularly when you add it to all the paranormal elements of their experiences and all the effects that happen to them, the electronic effects and how it changes their lives. And then when you add to that the whole close encounter package, which is what I call it, which is where they not only report close encounters, they also report near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, poltergeist activity, all those sorts of things.
Yes, absolutely. It just seems to grow and grow. We've had people here too who have started out chasing Bigfoot, going to an area where there have been Bigfoot sightings, and all of a sudden UFOs start appearing, and then the men in black are there, and before you know it, the government agents have showed up in panel trucks and so forth. It's all very peculiar and strange and fascinating.
Now back to exploring the bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Welcome back to Exploring the Bizarre. I'm Tim Swartz. Tonight we are talking with Cheryl Cultural, who has been working She's been a dedicated researcher of the UFO mystery for 31 years with the UFO Research Queensland. So, Cheryl, I know Tim was interested in finding out, what about has there been any research done on historical UFO sightings, say maybe with the Aboriginal people in Australia? I mean, I know that since 1947, we've had a lot of modern day press coverage, but what about the far past?
Well, the far, far past is really hard to get your hands on because only until recent times, Aboriginal people haven't been as free to share their knowledge as perhaps some other Indigenous people. Mm-hmm. They've been very quiet about what's gone on, but there have been a couple of researchers here who have collected reports from Aboriginal people. But again, it's been really difficult. It's real unless you're introduced to them. It's really difficult to find people who will talk. But in very recent years, they've been a little bit more forthcoming in sharing information because they want to get the information out there. Now, I have a friend who is an Aboriginal elder, and she actually takes people down to South Australia in groups to a very sacred place, and just to show them the Aboriginal sacred site and other things. But she's taken photos of petroglyphs on the cliff faces down there, and she said even the Aboriginal people don't know where these came from. They are so old, they're actually starting to fall off the cliff faces. So there are some things that they don't know, and they've been around for a long time. We know that. But there's in the Kimberley Ranges in Western Australia, there is, and this is probably where you've seen a lot of the images on the internet of sky beings or the Wandjina or the spirits, where they're depicted as humanoid looking, but they have this sort of markings around their head, like they're wearing headgear or something like that. Mm-hmm. And the question is, how do you draw something that you don't know exists? And I was having to think about this yesterday. How can you, I mean, you can be creative, but it's really difficult to sit down and draw something that you actually haven't seen or haven't seen something similar to it. You've just got to be original in that respect. And I don't think that's as easy as what some people think. So they depicted these Wandjina spirits who who were here and walking among people and interacting with them. But there's also a gentleman called Rex Gilroy down in the Blue Mountains in New South Wales, and he's collected some stories from the Aboriginal beings about the sky beings. And there was one that came to Earth in an egg that broke open. And what does that sound like? Mm-hmm. And emerged from there. So, there's certainly knowledge there. It's just trying to get it, trying to hear more about it.
It's the same situation here in the United States with Native Americans who have been reluctant to talk about their beliefs and experiences that continue till this day. Now, you brought up a good point, though. When it comes to UFOs and UFO experiences, and I know that there are nuts and bolt believers out there who hate this aspect of it, refuse to even consider it, but it does seem that there is another aspect to the UFO phenomena that is, for want of a better word, akin to paranormal phenomena. You had said in the previous segment,
yep.
How it's very reminiscent of near-death experiences, and as well, people who have had UFO encounters a lot of times then find their houses haunted with poltergeist and other weird things. So, I
Yeah.
mean, what is your opinion? I mean, do you think that there is more to UFOs than just metal spaceships coming from another solar system with scientists visiting us?
Absolutely. And the reason I say that is because in 1995, I was actually running a New Age centre, and I had a night about near-death experiences. And a woman came forward and she told me this. She wasn't there for ET experiences. She came forward and told me about a strange near-death experience she had where was near-death / out-of-body experience. But her young child had died and she'd been to the funeral that day, come home, obviously extremely distraught about the loss of her child. And she laid down on the bed. She didn't feel great. She laid down on the bed and she could feel her heart rate dropping and dropping and dropping. The next thing she knows, she's not in her body lying on the bed. She's walking along a path with her young child, with the hand of a young child, holding the hand of a young child, sorry. And they're going along this sort of windy path and they get to the typical point where people often talk about in near-death experiences, the point of no return, where you either make up your mind to go across or you turn around and go back, you can't come. Well, that's what happened with her. So she was met by a spirit being, and this being said, you can't come any further, but I will take the soul of your child from here on. I shall look after her. With much toing and froing and distraught and saying goodbyes and all that, she passed the daughter over to the spirit being. She returns on the path, and as she's returning, she sees a spaceship. Now, she's not a UFO person. She's out of her body. She sees this ship. She goes up. Somehow she gets into it. I can't remember now whether it was up some sort of platform or stairs or something, but she goes into it. She's laid down on something like a bed or a bench. They seem to do some sort of examination of her in her out-of-body state. Next thing she knows, she's up and she's back on the path. She walks back and then she wakes up on a bed. Now that, in 1995, really opened the package up for me, because I've had other experiences. People come forward and talk about that. There was another woman a couple of years ago, actually, who she's in her 60s now, but at age 12, she had a near-death experience. And she told me this because I run a monthly afterlife group as well. So that's where she told me. And she said she had gone into hospital. I think it was to have, her, not adenoids, might have been adenoids or something like that, something fixed in her throat anyway, or ears, whatever. Anyway, and they put the mask on her, but they didn't turn the oxygen on. So she's struggling, and the next thing, she's out of her body. She's looking at them trying to resuscitate her and all that. Then she sees herself in a line of people streaming towards the light at the end of this, like a tunnel or a tube or something like that. And as she's going towards the light, she also sees a return stream of light. And in this return stream, she sees a small boy, or she thinks it's a small boy, and he looks deformed. He's got a big head, he's got a very small body, and she thinks to herself, as a 12-year-old, oh, that poor little boy, he's so deformed, blah, blah. Anyway, she's returned to her body and she's fine today. But about 15 years ago, she came to our UFO meeting. I didn't know this, but she told me recently that she came to our UFO meeting, and as she walked in the door, someone was talking about alien abductions, and up on the screen they had one of these small grey beings, and she said, that is exactly what I saw during my near-death experience. Now, there's something really big going on there. It's not just about nuts and bolts and craft from planets and living in deep space and touching down on Earth to refill their resources and all that. There's something much, much bigger going on, and that's also communicated in Susie Hansen's book, The Dual Soul Connection, because Susie is a New Zealand experiencer researcher and author, and she had experiences that started at 20 when the car that she was in was lifted up off the ground, and she was subsequently later on she had experiences where she was taken on board a craft, and these little grey alien beings inserted the soul of her unborn son into her body. There's a really, I don't know how to impress this upon people, but this is just such a big story waiting to be unpacked by researchers who would dare to go there.
Well, and that's just it. I mean, the UFO subject for years, as you well know, and I mean, you've had to approach it and disseminate the information really just very, very carefully, for want of the giggle factor and ridicule. But now, with this overwhelming evidence of some other aspect of it that is paranormal, mystical, what have you, it's like, okay, how am I going to put this out and have people take me seriously?
Exactly. And I think what's happened with many UFO organisations and independent researchers is that in the past, they have wanted scientific attention. They had wanted to get professionals involved in the subject. That's great, but they weren't taking any notice for a long, 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 long time. Mm-hmm. And they've missed the bus as far as I'm concerned. So it's now up to researchers to get that information out there. We know that, mind you, some scientists are very quietly looking into the subject, of course, not going public with it. But, to help the subject, they have been more of a hindrance than anything else. So, it's huge. There's certainly something metaphysical, paranormal, supernatural, call it what you like, involved in it as well.
And that's what makes the phenomena so interesting, is that it has what appears to be physical attributes, and at the same time it has this other side. I mean, it's almost a ghostly part
Absolutely.
of it.
That's right.
Yeah, and so where do you think then researchers should go in the future on how to investigate this phenomena, how to deal with the people who are brave enough to come forward with their experiences without scaring them off, and to start gleaning this new information that's being presented to us? Information that really nobody has dared touch for a long time.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's not new. It's just that we have to be braver, I guess you could say, in putting the information out there, because I think that's what happened in the past, and people were concerned about the public reaction and, like you said, the giggle factor and taking it seriously. But, we're living in a different time now where we're talking about, there are some physicists who are talking about some interesting things like Michio Kaku, for example, talking about other dimensions and, string theory, and maybe some of their understanding of physics, modern day understanding of physics, can actually explain some of the metaphysical things that we're seeing, So it's a different time that we're living in now. So I think the time is actually right for more people to come forward, for researchers to present the information, because that's all it is. The information's always been there. It's just a matter of presenting it, not being so worried about, precious reputations, and getting it out there.
Hey, you know what I want to ask? Have UFO witnesses, we've had a lot of cases over here where UFO witnesses have been harassed by the so-called men in black. Have you had any cases like that over there?
Yes. One I was involved in, actually. Which is very, very strange.
Shoot
actually,
the works.
Yeah. Well, I've got two stories, but the first one is from, must have been about 20 years ago. A gentleman who was claimed he was a retired Green Beret soldier. He was living a few suburbs from me on property, and he called to report seeing a UFO. And I said, oh, that's interesting. And he never told me his name, never told me where he lived. I only found that out later. And I took down the notes and recorded it. Anyway, he says, and the UFO was like a light that he had been looking at that had come onto this property or acreage that he was living on and gone down into the gully behind the house and disappeared. And only moments after he got off the phone to me, there was a knock at the door. And he said, these two goons, I have no idea who they were, but they pushed their way into the door. And he said they were just ridiculous. They were wearing hats, dark glasses, they had pale skin, and they, harassed him, and he just pushed them out. And he rang me the next day, I think it was, or the day after, and he said, well, thanks very much for that. And I said, what do you mean? And he told me what happened. And I said, well, I don't know. You didn't give me your name. You didn't tell me where you lived. And you didn't give me your phone number. So perhaps someone was tracking the object that you had seen, and these people were aware that you had called our organisation and came to intimidate you, so you didn't discuss it because perhaps it was a very important thing that you saw. It could have been some sort of secret military testing, or because we have an airbase not too far from where we are, could have been something like that. So, yeah, that was a very interesting story, but they were all dressed in black. But another one that was very interesting, it occurred in the 70s, but a gentleman reported it to me in the late 90s, I think it was, or early 2000s. And he was living in an outback town in Queensland. I think it was Cunnamulla. And but don't quote me on that, but he said when he was a teenager, he was living in there, and it's a small town, not a lot around the town. And he was outside his grandmother's place where he was living, and there were with his mates. Some of them had cars, some of them were on motorbikes. And they saw this green object travel horizontally across the sky and slowly, and then it dropped to the ground. And as it dropped to the ground, it lit up the place like daylight. And that's a very common thing that we often hear with reports. And what happened was they all got in their cars and their bikes and they went out to where they thought it had come down, which was near a place called 10 Mile. But by the time they got there, the police were already there. And they're telling the boys, go away, go back home, whatever, this is none of your business, go home. So they did. But they did see that there were circles on the ground while they were there. Anyway, they went back later after the police had gone, and the place had been graded. The next day, these men in black, along with the local policemen, went to each of the boys' homes and intimidated them, told them they were not to talk about what they had seen, and keep their mouth shut, and we're watching, basically, something like that. Soon after that, the local policeman, who seemed very embarrassed about the situation, he committed suicide. And he had been a very friendly chap. He was friends with the young man who reported the thing to me, and he committed suicide. His personality changed completely before that. His wife and young child left the town. The highway used to go through that little town. Well, it was then diverted, so the highway did not go around the town. It did go around the town, sorry. And the gentleman who reported it to me, he had problems with his eyes the next day, and for months after that, he had problems with migraines. It could have been a UFO. It could have been some sort of military testing that had gone wrong. Who knows?
Well, we published a book. I've done quite quite a bit of reporting on the Men in Black. We did a book called Men in Black, UFO Terrorists Among Us. And one of the cases that we published in there was that of, I believe his name was John Stewart. Are you familiar with that case going back to the early 1950s, where this individual, he was head of a UFO group, and one of the members of the organization was molested, and then they finally disbanded the group because they were having these Men in Black were materializing, and Gerald Baker, I think, was another head of the group, and he was actually pushed down an escalator in a department store. And this goes back to the early, 1950s there in Australia. So there's a history of the MIBs, not only here in the States, but certainly in England and most other places where there are UFO incidents. In fact, we have an interview with him. I didn't do it. I mean, it was one that was done many, many years ago by Gray Barker, where he talks about about his experience and the things that happened. We'll have to send you a copy. Hey, I see, Tim, we're closing in on the end of the program here. And why don't you tell the listeners where they can get in touch with you and find out about your journal? And if we have some listeners over there in Australia that might be interested in even joining up.
Sure. Well, they can visit our website, which is UFO Research Queensland. Just search for that on the internet. We also have a Facebook page, the same name, UFO Research Queensland. And if you have a strange encounter, which is perhaps not a UFO experience, I'd love to hear from it. And you can find us on Strange Encounters Down Under Facebook page as well. Wonderful,
wonderful. Well, I must say I have enjoyed this conversation immensely. And in fact, I think it's up to you, of course, but we'd like to have you back on soon. We can do maybe every couple of months, like a half an hour, just updating our listeners on what's going on, down under, as they say. It's a fascinating subject, and it's a fascinating subject, and you're fascinating and a great guest, and want to thank you for being with us this evening. And
it's been my pleasure.
Tie me kangaroo down. Or maybe the kangaroo will tie us down. I don't know. Anyway, it's great having you on. And Tim, we're working on a couple of new books. Incredible Encounters is the one we're working on now, and still gathering material from researchers all over the world.
That's right. All right. So good night, Tim. Good night, Cheryl. Thanks, everyone, for listening.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Carol. And everybody have a great time, and check out our YouTube channel, Mr. UFO Secret File.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Exploring the Bizarre and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100. Exploring the Bizarre.